And now the awards for fiction. Question. In the largest of worlds, what adventures await the smallest of ships? In this fictional portrait of poet Pablo Neruda's childhood, young Neftali, shy and sickly, is that smallest of ships. Despite the bullying he endures from his rigid, tyrannical father, Neftali nevertheless possesses an unquenchable spirit and a love of nature, words, and ideas. Pam Munoz Ryan's lyrical prose, laced with imagery and onomatopoeia, brings us inside Neftali's experience. Her language is entirely original, and yet, when young readers later encounter Neruda's poetry, they will recognize his voice. Peter Sis's provocative illustrations deepen the story. Both ethereal and earthly, stacked on the page like boxes, they echo the objects Neftali so lovingly collects. Even the book design brings readers closer to Neftali. The ink as green as the Chilean rainforest, the generous page layout as open as the young boy's mind. For its sensory evocation of a remarkable childhood, its haunting illustrations, and the elegance of its bookmaking, we present a Boston Globe Hornbook Honor Award for Fiction to the Dreamer, published by Scholastic Press, edited by Tracy Mack, designed by David Saylor, written by Pam Munoz Ryan, and illustrated by Peter Sis. Peter Sis will come up first, and then Tracy Mack will accept for Pam.
Hello. I've been here before. Actually, I was just thinking I've been here before, each time with different publisher, which makes me look like a mercenary. But that's the way it goes. And I've been here before with the stories of my own. I always wanted to tell stories of my own. And I'm trying to do that, and will try to do that. The Dreamer made me think about one thing. When I never wanted to be an illustrator, I always wanted to tell stories of my own. I came to this country to make films of my own. Then when it didn't work out, I came to New York to make books of my own and turn them into films. Everybody thought my ideas were not, some people would say not quite up to the level, some people would say stupid. And I realized that if I want to pay the rent, I have to find some way of, some means of supporting myself, so I became an illustrator. I started to work for New York Times and did hundreds, almost 1,000 pictures for them, which is interesting because last week I met somebody at the party who said, you know, your stuff would be good for New York Times because people just don't remember that. And I started to get mostly thanks to Susan Hirschman from Greenvillow illustrations for other people's books. And I really didn't think very much of illustration because when I went to art school, the illustrators were always most timid and sort of boring people, much more than animators, really. And I didn't pay any attention, and when I got the books to illustrate, I was mostly thinking about myself and using it as a sort of showing who I am. And only much later I started to look into books like Maurice Sendak's Caldecott and Company, and realized that as a child, when I looked at the Moby Dick, I will never see it without the illustration of Rockwell Kent, for example. And it's that amazing balance between pictures and text, which was so hard to achieve. And I was trying to do it with different people I was matched, and I did illustrate almost 50 books. And at one point, I was trying to meet the authors without really the editors knowing about it, because the editors are being smart that they don't want you to meet the author. And then I realized that some authors can get really nasty and then demand what you're supposed to illustrate. So I started to work mostly with the dead people, which was Faust by Goethe and also Borges' book of imaginary beings. But that wasn't quite fulfilling because it seemed to be always compared with the history. And I thought I will not do it again because I had a chance to do my own books. And when you go, especially now I live in the suburbia, and if you come to some suburban party and they introduce you as a children's books illustrator, it's always some wife who says she wrote a story about a little teddy bear, and you're supposed to illustrate it in 2 weeks. So I was more like an author and an author. And But I was still dreaming about this perfect balanced book which would have all the elements. And that moment, and everything was changing in my life 2 years ago, came Tracy Mack with this story of The Dreamer by Pam Munoz Ryan. And for me, it was really no reason to, I have a studio near Scholastic, but I never did work with them. And David Saylor says that at one point I refused to do some sketches for the jackets for some book about Little Boy Wizard because I thought, who would ever buy a book like that? And I know that I called him when the Hugo Cabret came out because I just loved the dimension of that book, what the design did with it. But it wasn't that I was calling, that I was desperate to do something. And ever I knew that Hugo Cabret could be competing with my books, unfortunately. And then Tracy called me, and she sent me this story about Pablo Neruda, who I knew just few poems, and I love them very much. But my family house in Prague is on Neruda Street, and lots of people who speak Spanish who come to Prague do not realize that Pablo Neruda picked the name of obscure, for him, Czech poet Jan Neruda to change his name because he didn't want to carry the name of his father. And now when people come to Prague and visit the tea shop of my sister, they always say, oh, this is the street named after Pablo Neruda, which shows how history is interesting. And so I got a story and we started to talk, and I was really very impressed with how David Saylor and Tracy went about the whole thing, because I thought it would be just a few illustrations, and then it was growing and growing and growing. And it became one of those books when it's just perfect, and it has nothing to do with me, because if I look at the illustrations now, when I see them in black and white, they are not really special, but the way how David Saylor designed them and how the whole team of people put together this book, I think it's a very special book, and I'm very proud of it. And I really appreciate this very special award for all the people who do illustration and try to serve the text. Thank you very much.
For Pam.
Hi, everyone. Pam is so sorry she couldn't be here tonight. She is in South Korea on Nami Island at the Ibi Nambook Festival on Peace, but she wanted me to share some of her words about the inspiration for this book. She writes, after traveling to Chile in 2005, I became intrigued with the childhood of Pablo Neruda, or rather the childhood of the boy, Neftali Reyes, who would someday change his name and become the great poet. I was also infatuated with the country, the food, the Andes, the colors and songs. And I was especially fond of the children in the schools who crowded around me, held their arms against mine, and squealed in Spanish, "She is the same as us." And it was true. I am one of the colors of Chile. When I came home, I could not shake my sentimental feelings. Then, a few weeks later, a colleague shared a story about Neruda with me. That story and my lingering attachment to Chile and all its riches set me on my journey. The Dreamer was a work of challenge and joy. During the writing, I read Neruda's poetry every day. I lived and breathed his memoirs and the many biographies written about him. The Dreamer was also a work of trepidation, especially given my unusual approach of weaving questions and poetry throughout the narrative. I was so enamored by Neruda's The Book of Questions that I wanted to write questions of my own to parallel his story. Because Neruda acknowledged poetry as an inescapable path from which he could not wrest himself, I wanted to write my own poetry in the voice of poetry. And since the rhythm of his early life was so prevalent in my mind, I wanted the reader to hear it too. The persistent rain of southern Chile, the call of the chukau bird, the sound of the pounding ocean, and the monotony of the printing press. When I presented my ideas to my editor, Tracy Mack, she was encouraging and unfailingly enthusiastic. Wouldn't you be? My publisher, Scholastic, embraced the book with all its idiosyncrasies, and joy of joys, Tracy brought Peter Sis on board. Dot by dot, he enhanced and transported us to Naphtali's ethereal world. It's what an author always hopes, that there will be an editor, illustrator, and publisher who stand beside the work, investing their own particular magic. I want to share that one story from Naphtali's life that seduced me and made me fall in love with the possibility of this book. As a boy, Naphtali was painfully shy and friendless. One day, an unknown child in the backyard next door passed him an old toy sheep through a hole in the fence. Naphtali reciprocated with a treasured possession, a pine cone from the Aruncanian forest. He never discovered who passed him the sheep, but he also never forgot the incident. Throughout his life, Pablo Neruda considered the gesture a reminder that all humanity is somehow connected. As a writer, I pass my work through a hole in the fence, never knowing who is on the other side, never knowing who or if or when someone might pick up my book and have a reaction, a communion, a revelation, an indignant rampage, or the desire to honor it with an award. Given the prestigious reputation of the Boston Globe Hornbook Awards, I am thrilled and grateful that The Dreamer found its way to your backyard. I do not have enough words of thanks to reciprocate, and I'm much too far away to give you all a pine cone. I can only pass you the most heartfelt affection through a very distant hole in the fence.